Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, joined now by Admiral Mark Montgomery, retired United States Navy. Hello, Admiral. How are you?
Good afternoon, Hugh. How are you?
I'm good. I began the program with retired General Mel Spees, Major General in the Marine Corps, and I asked him, okay, the president decided to mix it up at the Joint Chiefs, and he wants to find a new CNO, and that's his right. What should he be looking for in a CNO, Admiral Montgomery?
I think that you want to see that's really requirements driven right now for two reasons. One, um, we actually have to source a war plan, right? I know we sometimes say, our mutual friend Jerry Henderson will say we need a Navy strategy. I think we need a defense strategy and then a Navy strategic plan to execute what the COCOM says they need for the defense strategy. In other words, the Navy doesn't have an independent strategy; they have a strategic plan to properly service the combatant commanders in executing the President and Secretary of Defense's strategies. So first of all, you need to have somebody who understands requirements and can get that done. The second part, and that's important because that's what weapon system could substitute for something. Sometimes a COCOM wants missile X. What about missile Y? The second part that you need in a CNO is someone who can tackle this shipbuilding problem. Look, the Secretary of the Navy is coming in pretty fresh, doesn't have a lot of naval experience. I think Secretary Phelan is going to lean heavily on the CNO to be that person that's a truth teller about what the companies are telling him, the yards are telling him, and the shipyard commanding officers are telling him. And that's gonna take some tough talk from a CNO. So those two skill sets, requirements and shipbuilding, I think are the key in the next CNO.
I knew a shipbuilder, retired captain now, and there aren't that many billets for people who build ships. Do we have shipbuilders in the Navy? Are there enough people to put their hands up and say, or at least be considered by the president, to be a CNO of a ship of an expanding Navy?
So I think it's not going to be someone who comes from a purely acquisition naval or an engineering duty officer, Naval Sea Systems Command. We do have 1 and 2 stars that do develop that skill, but he could look at a very senior acquisition professional, someone who was both commanded a ship, but then later in their career shifted over into the acquisition end of it. That could be, I would not recommend doing that routinely with the chief of naval operations. But if you say to yourself, our shipbuilding project is, behind on every ship that we're building by a total of, 11 to 16 years, collectively, then you might say, I think this is, you got to make the number one thing the number one thing. And at some point, that's shipbuilding. Now, look, you got to be careful with this because you need someone who understands the aviation aspects, so, some of the other aspects, the special operations aspects of the Navy. So I would not go down an engineering duty path, but I might consider someone with some acquisition background for this job. But again, I think that's a one-time or two-time only thing.
Now, I also asked General Spees the question, which I put to you: how do we make strategists in the way that Field Marshal Allen showed up in time for Churchill and George Marshall showed up in time for FDR? Do we have a plan to produce people like that vis-a-vis China for the next 50 years?
No, we get them ad hoc. So you get people like Admiral Stavridis, who uniquely, through his own efforts to get different degrees and programs, created himself, right? And those are infrequent. There have been a few of them. We actually got rid of the program that produced them. It sent them to Tufts to get PhDs, and then kind of watched them over their careers. But that program since ended. We don't work too hard at this. Look, I grew up in a Navy that didn't value going to the War College, for example, and the War College was critical to developing the officers, the naval counterparts to the Brooks and the Marshalls. It produced. He's a son of a bitch, but Admiral King and Admiral Leahy.
Everything I've read
Um,
about Admiral King is just, you're absolutely right. That's what he was.
yeah, my grandfather trained him at flight school to get his pseudo wings that he got as a captain, and I would say my grandfather didn't say bad things about too many people, except some of the Japanese he fought. and Admiral King. So I would just say that. But so how do we get them? We get them because we need to reemphasize our war college. The Army treats the Army War College like a rite of passage. The Navy treats the Navy War College like something you're trying to pass around, right? We have got to embrace that more. I think if we're going to develop strategists, look, that's to make everyone a little smarter, but to cull the people out. I think you watch the graduates of that. You see what people write there, how they think there, and then you cull a few out and give them another opportunity to strategic process a few years later in their career after their next major milestone.
So,
And if you do
Admiral,
that, I think
big question. The Pacific's so doggone big, and Americans are not used to thinking about Malaysia and Indonesia and the Philippines, et cetera. Does the Navy force feed that into its officers?
no. In fact, I'll tell you, in the surface warfare community, the first port off the board is Rota, right in Spain. I promise. And so, uh, my
That's
son
in
got Yakuza.
Spain. We got to
Yeah,
tell
it's in
people
Spain. Yeah.
in Pittsburgh that's in Spain. Yeah.
So my son got Yokosuka, the prime warfighting port in Japan, and he told me it was on the board, so to speak, till about 70% of the way through the class. So I'll just say, Rota off the board in the first 3 or 4%. Japan, where Spain, where there's not, it's not where we're at, top 3%. Japan, where it's at, we're taking you down to 70%. So I'll just say, we're not quite there yet.
So, how do you change that culture? We have a minute. I mean, what do we do? If we have a conflict in the next 50 years, it's a big one. It's going to be with China, right? So, shouldn't we start studying China?
Yeah, I think there's things we can do to prioritize the work at the War College. I think they're starting to do that. Look, I think there is a, I think San Paparo does a great job pushing the Pacific, thinking about the war plans. San Paparo being the Indo-PACOM commander. So I think we're doing a little bit more of it. But look, if you're asking me how do we make it more strategic, that's an actual process that will take a few years and more investment by the Navy in long-term strategic thinking.
I hope they are working on it as of tonight. Admiral Mark Montgomery, thank you. Always a